This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. The new year brings new health goals and wealth goals. Protecting your identity is an important step. LifeLock monitors millions of data points per second. If your identity is stolen, LifeLock's restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed or your money back. Resolve to make identity health and wealth part of your New Year's goals with LifeLock. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
This is the Daily Blast from the New Republic, produced and presented by the DSR Network. I'm your host, Greg Sargent. This week, Donald Trump uncorked an epic tirade on Truth Social in which he singled out numerous Republicans who have crossed him. Trump ranted that no one with ties to those Republicans should bother seeking jobs in his new administration. The inclusion of Nikki Haley among them got the most attention because after she lost her primary against Trump, she bent the knee and endorsed him with obsequious praise. It didn't do her much good. Her reward for it is that she's now getting humiliated by Trump in pretty thorough fashion. But there's another story here worth focusing on as well. This is best seen as a warning from Trump to future critics in Republican circles. If you criticize him, you risk being on the outs with no way back in. Today we're chatting about this with Casey Michelle, a reporter who covers lobbying and influence peddling and wrote a good piece for the New Republic on the coming resurgence of kleptocracy in the Trump era. Thanks for coming back on, Casey.
Yeah, Greg, it's great to be back with you.
So in his rant, Trump said this: "It would be helpful if you would not send or recommend to us people who worked with or are endorsed by," and then he listed a number of people, cited Liz Cheney, Mitt Romney, and Mike Pence, of course, and quote-unquote bird brain Nikki Haley, and a bunch of others. He accused them of suffering from Trump derangement syndrome and so forth. Casey, everyone laughed at this, but it actually seems to send a pretty serious message. Criticize Trump, and you might be on the outs forever, no matter how unctuously you suck up to him later and repent, like Nikki Haley now. Is this a warning?
Yeah, Greg, absolutely it is. I mean, I think this is all downstream from the fact that it is absolutely clear that the thing Trump prizes most is loyalty, is fealty, is not even specific policy positions or broader specific strategic recommendations. It is simply loyalty to the man. Whatever he says, whatever he does, whatever he pursues, and of course, whatever benefits him personally, you're either with him or you're against him. And there's no coming back, as Nikki Haley now well knows.
Yes, and this weekend, Trump will have his inauguration where we'll see D.C. absolutely overrun with the most obsequious loyalists you can imagine. We're already learning some pretty awful stuff. The chief executive of TikTok has been invited to sit on the dais, and all these tech oligarchs will have positions of honor. Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, all the parties for inaugural weekend are like a big coming out moment for the tech oligarchy and the Silicon Valley elite. Lots of companies are pouring millions of dollars into Trump's inaugural committee. What do you make of Trump openly giving a place of honor to these elites this way, Casey?
Well, Greg, you and I were talking off mic that one of the key differences emerging in the second Trump administration versus what we saw in the first is clearly this relationship with other deep-pocketed donors who were generally considered to be of at least liberal or potentially even centrist bent, now racing to be the first to visit Trump at Mar-a-Lago and, of course, support him in the inauguration. And I have no doubt continue to support him for months and months to come. And what we see is this emerging class of what is, for lack of a better term, truly an oligarchy emerging in the United States of America. And I don't think it's any surprise that that is really the kind of term of art we have seen bandied about so much since Trump's election victory. And I wasn't even necessarily surprised to see current President Biden in his farewell address warn about the rise of this new oligarchic class, because that is really the key distinction for what we are seeing buttressing Trump this time around.
I want to ask you about that Biden speech for a second. It seems like it actually is a way to say to Democrats on Biden's part, he's saying this, Democrats, you should now start indicting this oligarchy. You now need to talk about what's happening in this country. You're someone who's covered this stuff for a long time. It's pretty opaque to a lot of people. Is there a role for Democrats to start actually defining this oligarchy, saying how it works, why it's such a menace?
Yes, absolutely there is. There's a wide opening that's getting bigger and bigger by the day. And again, much of that is related directly to the actions of the Mark Zuckerbergs and the Jeff Bezoses and, of course, the Elon Musks of the world, leading them wide open to the kind of criticism that is right there for the taking if only Democrats lean in on it. The farewell address that we saw from Biden was right on the money, warning about this emerging class of oligarchs and the kind of threat they pose to democracy in the United States, but frankly around the world at this point as well. This was something that I wish we had seen from President Biden months, if not years before. But I do think this is one of those speeches that folks are going to be talking about for a long, long time, especially as the threat of this oligarchic class only grows more salient, both domestically as well as internationally.
It seems to me that all these elites this weekend with the inauguration and beyond are doing something more than the usual influence peddling. It's almost a celebration of the idea that oligarchy and kleptocracy are set for a particularly big moment now under Trump. Trump ran openly on a vow to govern in a way that will enrich wealthy elites who supported him with campaign donations. He made open quid pro quo demands of big oil executives and wealthy investors. He won. Now, all these people are partying expressly about the fact that they won on those terms, right? How do you understand that aspect of this moment as someone who's tracked this stuff for so long?
You know, it's the culmination of trends that were years, if not decades in the making, the lifting of caps on things like campaign spending, the opacity surrounding so much political money swirling around Washington. I think it's worth highlighting the fact, though, that it's frankly not just these American oligarchs that are celebrating Trump's return to the White House. This is part of a global cast of characters of generally authoritarian regimes with their kind of oligarchic proxies that are now salivating at the prospect of a new administration. They will not be targeted with sanctions. They will not be prosecuted. They will not be investigated. And frankly, they can use their money as much as these American oligarchs are in terms of influencing and accessing the Trump White House. This is really what it portends, the kind of opening to any deep-pocketed individual, whether American or not, to the White House, to the highest rungs of American power.
In your piece for the New Republic, you point out that foreign agents are rising higher in Trump's orbit than before. Susie Wiles, who will be his chief of staff, and Pam Bondi, who will almost certainly be his attorney general, were both registered foreign lobbying agents. Jared Kushner and the Trump Organization are doing all these deals in the Mideast, as we discussed before. There are now these new, very clear and wide open channels to channeling bribes to the president. What is this new Trump kleptocracy that's emerging here? I mean, it's a new kind of beast, isn't it? It's both more public, more explicit, more self-celebratory in ways I don't think we've seen before, have we?
No, Greg, and I think that's a key point. We have never seen something like this before. Of course, the common refrain is that, yes, we have seen these kind of plutocratic elements in things like the Gilded Age with robber barons in American history, but we have never seen such a singular cohort of so many deep-pocketed individuals with direct access to the White House. And beyond that, we have certainly never seen a president like Donald Trump who completely blurs the lines, completely dissolves the lines between private interest and public policy. This is not a surprise to you or to listeners that so much of Trump's policy, whether domestic or increasingly foreign, is predicated on what benefits him, his inner circle, his family, and of course the Trump Organization itself. And I do think it's worth highlighting that the Trump Organization has come forth and said that they do have an ethics pledge. And all they say is they won't do any deals with foreign officials or foreign governments. But that leaves the door wide open to doing deals with foreign individuals, foreign companies, or any other proxies for these regimes. And of course, these regimes can do this in seconds. They can set up a company themselves that is nominally independent that the Trump Organization can then work with. That is little more than a cutout for X dictatorship or Y autocracy or whatever the interests may be.
Yeah, and I want to try to go back and go big picture in another way. In 2016, Donald Trump kind of ran as the guy who knows that elites are corrupt. He ran as the guy who was a member of the corrupt elite. He had seen corruption from the inside. He understood how double dealing worked. He would put his knowledge of inside corruption to work on behalf of the American people. it kind of occurs to me that we're not even hearing him even say that now. At this point, what he's basically saying is we're just going to have a big party and loot the place blind from top to bottom. There's not any kind of explicit declaration of why all this kind of dealing with elites, all this deal making in public, why it will help the American people or the country. Is there?
No, certainly not that I've seen. And of course, Trump is also coming in with, frankly, more confidence than he's ever had. Of course, he has both houses of Congress. He has an entire political party completely at his feet, at his beck and call. I don't even know why it would necessarily be in his interest to pay any lip service to any of those similar talking points that we saw in the first term. And of course, we did see in the first term that knowledge of these illicit financial channels, of these open areas of access to foreign influence, of course, that did benefit someone, but it certainly wasn't the American public. It was the then and now future president, Donald Trump, his family, and the Trump organization.
It's funny, when we see the inauguration this weekend and we see Zuckerberg and Musk and Bezos up there on the dais, all of those three people have explicitly and obsequiously paid tribute to Trump. Musk spent $250 million or something like that to help him get elected. Zuckerberg recently just canceled fact-checking at Meta in keeping with what Trump wants, using Trumpian language about fact-checking. And Bezos canceled the editorial endorsing Kamala Harris and defended it with complete bullshit. They're all kind of just celebrating the fact that they've got their MAGA king and they're going to pay tribute to him in public, and it's all good. Everybody wins.
Yeah, look, they're going all in on Trump. They think it is in their interest. They think it is in their business interest. And maybe in the very short term it is. But again, to get back to earlier in the conversation, Greg, they're leaving the doors wide open for Democrats to go all in on highlighting all of the threats and all of the impact, the devastating, damaging impact, both on American democracy as well as plenty of other interests domestically and internationally that these new oligarchs are posing. And I won't be surprised if we begin seeing that kind of blowback not long after the inauguration. Look, things are plenty rosy for Trump right now, but it's one thing to run, and of course it's another thing to govern, and we'll see where we are in a few months' time.
There are some exciting changes underway at the DSR network, and we're so happy to share them all with you. In response to requests from our listeners, we're making it easier to find the podcasts you want where you want. Starting February 1st, We're All Gonna Die Radio, Words Matter, and Above Average Intelligence will be available exclusively in their individual podcast feeds. We're also revamping some of our shows with new logos and new looks, so stay tuned. To find the exclusive feeds for each show, click the link in the show description. And to support our work here at the DSR Network, and to get exclusive benefits like an ad-free listening experience, exclusive content, access to our Discord community, and more, please consider becoming a member. Use code DSR2025 to get 40% off your membership sign-up at thedsrnetwork.com/buy. That's code DSR2025 at thedsrnetwork.com/buy. Thank you and enjoy the show.
There's a history here. We've said this on the show before, but in 2004, George W. Bush looked invincible. He kind of looked a little like Trump does now. Republican Party was in lockstep behind him. Bush seemed to have total control over the information environment with the Iraq War. But then after 2004, things started to unravel through a combination of incompetence and, importantly, corruption. A big part of the story of the 2006 midterm gains by Democrats was that they campaigned hard against corruption on the part of Republicans. And I don't think Trump can actually tame the press here in the United States. He can do them some damage. He can kill an editorial here. He can get, a suck-up profile of Melania there. But we're going to see some aggressive reporting on the emerging corruption, and I think that could start to really damage them.
The beauty and the curse of another Trump presidency is the fact that he brings corruption and kleptocracy front and center right? There is no distinguishing him as a president or as a businessman from these kind of corrupt networks. And I have no doubt that details are going to continue to emerge. Investigations will shine a light on all of these different dark money networks that are swirling into the Trump White House, taking full advantage. We won't know everything. We won't learn about every single network, but it is going to be front and center for years to come.
I want to talk a little more about what you said earlier about how Democrats can really kind of go hard at this. I think there's basically a kind of skepticism or, I don't know, cynicism on the part of a lot of people who sort of say, okay, everybody's corrupt in Washington. Trump is just, he's just doing exactly what's been done there for years and decades and so forth. And I think there's probably some reason to worry that the public tunes out a lot of it. But at the same time, the public hates corruption in Washington, and it turns on the party in power. It is going to require Democrats to keep up the heat and make the case, though, right? To keep the spotlight shined on this stuff. How would you advise Democrats to tell people that kleptocracy and oligarchy is bad, that it matters?
Well, absolutely. It's going to come down to using those terms, which fortunately or otherwise, Americans across the country are becoming increasingly familiar with themselves. Again, it was wonderful to see President Biden do this, but these are the kind of terms that Democrats are going to need to keep highlighting and hammering, as well as highlighting other examples of other countries elsewhere where the oligarchs, especially in places like Russia, really sank their teeth into a country and effectively devastated the democracy that was there in the 1990s. It's also about Congress, and we saw some of this actually in Trump's first term, as well as in the aftermath. It's about congressional investigations, highlighting the role and realities of what the Trump administration is doing to benefit Donald Trump himself, whether it is investigations into the Trump organization or to some of the shell companies that are operating, or whatever the actual manifestation of that is. I was, I suppose, always pleasantly surprised by whether it was the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations or the Senate Finance, whatever it might be, congressional investigators really took the reins in guiding the American public to the corruption of the first Trump administration. They have to do that the second time around.
Well, what has to happen again is Democrats have to take the House back in 2026. I think the public is going to want a check on the madness that's going on, and that's really where it could come, right?
Absolutely. I mean, of course, it is highlighting the relationship between oligarchy, wealth inequality, and day-to-day living expenses, things getting tougher, things getting more expensive, being unable to find childcare, being unable to find elder care. This is all part and parcel of a broader messaging that has to focus on just how unfair this economy now is for those Americans on the ground, with those benefiting at the top surrounding Donald Trump.
Right. They have to make a case, Democrats do, that Trump and his cast of misfit oligarchs and kleptocrats are looting the place from top to bottom.
Yeah. Yes, 100%. And of course, there are other elements, national security concerns, intelligence concerns, so on and so forth. But it really comes down to the kind of bread and butter issues that we know move so many American voters.
I want to link this back to the rant about Nikki Haley and Republicans. Trump is going very far in saying explicitly and openly that people who criticize him could face punishment from state power in his hands. Throughout the campaign, he said media organizations that displeased him should lose broadcasting rights. Now, remember, Trump threatened to jail Zuckerberg, and then when he got the cancellation of fact-checking at Meta, Trump was asked if his threats had produced that outcome, and he said, "You're damn right they did." So the larger context here is that in every possible way, Trump is letting everyone know that it's time to fall in line, and that for those who are loyal all the way down, the spoils will be rich and great.
Yes. Look, I think it is worth folks reading up on the history of organized crime, both in the United States as well as elsewhere, and the kind of internal governance structures and governance modes that we have seen in these kinds of mafiosi organized groups. I think that is an absolute indication of the kind of leadership style and governance structure we are set to see here in the United States of America, and frankly across many authoritarian regimes around the world.
You want to explain to listeners what the Mafia State is?
Well, the Mafia State is basically exactly as it sounds. It is effectively state capture, the seizure of the levers of state power by those who either are or certainly appear to be members of organized crime groups. It is basically statewide racketeering, all for the benefit of the rulers in power. And again, this gets back to the root of kleptocracy, which literally means rule of thieves. It is those in power that are the ones benefiting, while those on the ground, those voters around the country, are the ones that are suffering day in and day out without any kind of way to actually get that government out of power.
So what does a mafia state look like under Trump, presuming he can put one in place? It's not exactly organized crime. It's a bunch of organized interests that are a little different from, mafiosi, but maybe not all that different. What does it really look like in the real world here?
I'm not comfortable saying the United States is imminently headed for mafia state status, but certainly in the longer run, if this is a kind of governance style we are set to see for years, maybe decades to come, then I think folks are generally familiar with things in Putin's Russia currently look like: a one-party state, a dictator in power for years and years, benefiting him and the oligarchic class underneath him. I think in the more short term, that a model that folks are going to recognize is what we saw take place in Hungary under Viktor Orban, where Orban may not necessarily be a dictator, but it is increasingly difficult year in, year out to dislodge him and his cronies. He has friends running the media. He has friends running security services. He has friends running the main export sectors, so on and so forth, all of them engaged in practices that benefit the ruling elite and Viktor Orban himself. That is the concern. That is the model that I can see perfectly plausibly moving forward in the United States.
And so just to bring it back one more time to Nikki Haley and Republicans and Trump's weird rant, he's basically telling people that this is going to be a government for friends that punishes enemies, right? I mean, the warning is part of what you're talking about. It's part of this evolution towards this kind of not mafia state, but Orban-esque kind of government, right?
And there's power in the humiliation, right? This is what Trump is doing with figures like Nikki Haley, who of course was outspoken against him in the primary, but then ended up sucking up and kissing the ring. And now he is publicly blasting her. And there's nothing she can do about it. There's no way that she can recover from this. It is humiliation all the way through. And again, it is, as you said, Greg, it is a warning and further indication that there is nothing Trump prizes more than loyalty and fealty, not to any policies, but to Trump the man, Trump the president, and Trump himself. The humiliation, that really is the warning itself. It doesn't matter what you say. It doesn't matter even how much you criticize, but then kiss the ring. You are still opening yourself up for public national humiliation at the end of the day itself. And this is something that everyone across the board is going to realize and recognize. And know there's only one way to avoid that, and that is to stay in Trump's good graces. You can't criticize, you can't investigate, you can't reveal, and you certainly can't oppose the president. That is the kind of model of governance we are seeing implemented under the new Trump administration.
Well, this is going to be a real learning experience for all of us. And Casey, you're pretty well positioned to capitalize because you've covered this stuff a long time and you've got books all about kleptocracy.
I do. Yes. Thanks, Greg. As a shameless self-plug, my first book was on American kleptocracy, on offshore finance and dark money in the United States. And my second book, Foreign Agents, on the foreign lobbying industry and how it has exploded, especially under governments like Donald Trump's in recent years. And yes, I wish there was better news to share, and I wish my career wasn't quite so relevant as it is right now.
Well, not only is it going to explode, it's going to go into supernova mode now. Casey Michelle, thanks so much for coming on, man.
Thanks so much, Greg.
Folks, make sure to check out some great new content we have up at TNR.com. Kate Aronoff arguing that if the rich really did flee LA in the wildfire wake, rebuilding might actually be easier. And Matt Ford on the right-wing judge who's on a mission to destroy ESG retirement planning. And check out the latest episode of Deep State Radio on the DSR network as Jen Rubin and Norm Eisen join David Rothkopf to discuss the future of pro-democracy media as traditional outlets further bend the knee to Trump. We'll see you all next week. You've been listening to The Daily Blast with me, your host, Greg Sargent. The Daily Blast is a New Republic podcast and is produced by Riley Fessler and the DSR network.